Now I know our past couple examples have been about completing the square, followed by using the square root property, but I do want to take a step back for a minute and just to remind you that the square root property is actually our way of solving these quadratic equations so far. Of saying if I have a perfect square on one side, number on the other, that's a piece of cake. I just take the positive, negative square root of both sides, and voila, I'm done. Because we're going to do a word problem right now that's actually pretty darn easy to solve because all we got to do is use the square root property. So this is a compound interest problem in which we're given the formula for compound interest, and this is compound interest that's compounded annually. Later in the semester, we'll get into a more complicated version of compound interest. But compound interest basically means you get interest compounded on your account, but then the interest just automatically gets put into your account, so that the next time the interest would come up, you have more money. You're getting even more interest. That interest goes back in your account. Next time you get interest, you get even more money. And so we'll get into the full formula for it later, but for now, we're looking at A equals P times 1 plus R to the T, where A is your future value or your total amount you're going to end up with in your account. The P is your principal, or sometimes called present value. It's the amount that you start off with in your account. The R is the interest rate that you're earning. This interest rate is always entered as a decimal. And then T is the time that you're collecting interest for, and that's going to be measured in years. So in this problem, you're asked to find R, for which $800 is going to grow to be $882 over the course of 2 years. So 800 is the amount that we start with. That's the P. 882 is the amount we end with. That's the A. 2 years is the amount of time it stays there for. That's the T. So let's plug these values into our formula. We have A equals P times 1 plus R to the T power. So given this equation that we're trying to solve for R, what I want you to see is that we almost have a perfect square by itself on one side. The stuff I have highlighted is a perfect square. The stuff that's not a perfect square is the 800 sitting next to him. So we want to get rid of that. Now, one of the common errors I see on these problems is I see people that subtract 800 from both sides. And the reason that we do this is our brain is thinking, how much interest did we make? We made $82 of interest. So this is a very intuitive calculation. It's not the correct calculation. It's not the mathematical way to solve this, because in between the 800 and the parenthesis is a multiplication sign. We want to undo that multiplication. To undo that multiplication, we need to divide. So make sure you're doing the proper math, that subtraction would undo addition. And we don't have addition. We have multiplication. To undo multiplication, we do division. So we're left with 882 over 800 on the left. Yeah, this could probably simplify. We could probably toss it in the calculator, but I don't care about that right now. What I care about is what's left over here. I now have a perfect square on the right-hand side. So now I can use the square root property. I can take the positive and negative square root of both sides. And in order to solve for R, I can subtract 1. So negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 882 over 800 equals R. Let's use our calculator to help out with this. So let's do negative 1 plus the square root of 882 over 800. And we get an answer of 0.05, which I'll jot down in a second. But we got to do the minus part of the plus minus as well. So if instead of plus I have a minus, then that's negative 2.05. So those are my two possible answers, is 0.05 and negative 2.05. Now keep in mind that this rate is a decimal representing a percent. So as a percent, this would be 5% or negative 205%. Now obviously this answer is dumb, and that's what's going to happen on a lot of these word problems, is we're getting two answers, one's going to make sense, one doesn't. And so our interest rate that we're speaking of is 0.05 or 5%.